Hello, Lorenzo here, episode 29 of KSP Next. Today we're doing something exciting. We are going to the moon with a passenger, a pilot, who is meant to return safely. Now, here you join us at the Space Center. What I did for this mission is build a second launch pad. Actually, that was already there, but I've upgraded it to accommodate Saturn V class rockets. Now, the moon rocket I designed theoretically should have the Delta V required, but you know, things can go wrong. And I decided to have a safety vehicle in position. We're launching that one first, the XE. You will notice on top it is missing a lunar lander and ascent module. That's because this will just have the upper stage service module parked in lunar orbit, ready to lend assistance if that would be required. Unfortunate theme for this episode is that all the launches and burns are pretty much on the dark side of planet Earth, thanks to mandatory alignments with the plane of the moon. So we shall be skipping through them fairly quickly. Now, the mission architecture, owing to the two rockets, is slightly different than the traditional Apollo style. Actually, it should be. If the emergency rocket is not required, it could resemble Apollo. It's using the pre-made real solar system lunar descent and ascent modules, so those look Apollo-ish. We don't dock back with the service module because we don't have docking ports yet. We instead EVA out to the vehicle, but other than that, it's pretty similar. Anyway, we are in orbit now, charting a course for the moon. As I said, everything in darkness. But you've seen me do it. I trust you, trust me that this is legit. Because there's no lander modules, the upper stage has a lot of spare Delta V and is actually capable of completely doing the lunar insertion, which is, you know, convenient. Here we are at the moon, separating from that upper stage and finalizing lunar orbit circularization. The altitude we do this, I'm going to put the emergency craft at an altitude of about 4,000 kilometers, pretty circular, with the thinking that that should lend sufficient flexibility to spring to come to the aid of any stricken passengers. Anyway, we are there. We will leave this rocket here and proceed back to Earth, where we are going to launch Catherine Brooks. If all goes well, the first woman and indeed first Kerbal on the moon. It's called the X. You can't see it because it's dark, but this rocket has the descent and ascent modules on top. As before, we shall be speeding through the launch sequence because that's not at all the most interesting bit of this mission, let me tell you that. That said, the launch does proceed nominally with the Saturn, the F1 engines burning nicely, switching to the second stage and, you know, doing its thing, inserting Catherine into low Earth orbit. If you're paying real good attention, you can see that this stage is accelerating not as fast as the previous one, owing to the approximately, what was it? I think it's 35 tons for the lunar descent and subsequent ascent modules. They're pretty heavy, but they have to be because they have about 2,500 meters per second of Delta V each, of course, to get down to the surface and then back up again. That is actually a challenge because the descent module, it does throttle down real low to about 10% thrust, but it does come with only 3 ignitions, so these are going to be long and controlled burns. None of the KSP-esque 5,000 relights on an engine to just fine-tune everything. No, 3 burns maximum. Here's an opportunity to see the spaceship. The one time it is in the sun, it's not doing a burn because, you know, those are all at the dark side, but there's the upper stage with the lunar excursion vehicle perched on top of it. Isn't it a beauty? Anyway, there we are doing our trans-lunar injection burn, again in the darkness. And as I was saying, this descent burn, it's going to be very long because the thrust of the descent module isn't that great, and hopefully controlled enough to not crash. That's always the hope, I suppose. um, so yeah, as I said, 3 ignitions on that one, and then the ascent module. That's a bit more nimble because, of course, it's not carrying the descent module anymore. That has 10 ignitions, so a little bit more flexibility on that one. Here we are with the upper stage or service module performing the last of the translunar injection burn. This was only to be used at the, I mean, for reference, the escape stage, the emergency stage, that only had to light its upper stage engines at the moon. This one lit them at Earth once, and then once in a mid-course correction that's not shown. And now we are approaching lunar periapsis, which is fairly low. It's at 268 kilometers. And we shall be preparing for our lunar orbit insertion burn. The ship has enough delta V to do that, and then it has a couple hundred delta V left, which by itself isn't enough to take us back to Earth, but of course that number is going to go up a huge amount as soon as the cargo, the lunar excursion vehicle, is released. So as I said, theoretically it should have enough. But look at that. In the screen, ignitions remaining 0. Right now there is alarm bells flaring in my head. Oh my god, no more ignitions on this rocket. That means it's not going back at all. What do we do? I will be honest, I panicked, and because I did not consider this at all, and I cut the engines and quick loaded, and that went back to like 5 minutes before. Not enough to substantially alter the mission. Anyway, I did some thinking and decided, fuck it, we are committed now. This is still a mission. We're gonna land on the moon. So I used up the upper stage to lower the orbit to about 25-ish kilometers periapsis. There we are, a bit more, 60-ish if I look at it correctly. And now this upper stage doesn't have any ignitions remaining. So we definitely do need the rescue vehicle. That one still has 3 ignitions remaining on its engines. But that's for a later concern, because right now we are committed to a lunar landing with the descent engine. It doesn't show the RCS plumes, but it has some RCS thrusters that actually run on the same fuel as does the ascent engine. So any turning inputs we do drains delta V from the ascent stage, albeit a very low amount. Anyway, as you can see, the control authority is very, very low. I am giving it full turning input, and yet it's not really turning. I'm throttling down the engine as well, because we're pointing in a very suboptimal position. But as I mentioned, with the limited amount of relights, we do have to keep the engine on. Anyway, here we are, throttling up to full. I suggest you look at the the instrument readouts on the left. On the top left, we can see the acceleration is currently about 3 meters per second squared, and on the slightly to the left of the middle, the surface info panel, that one reads our true altitude and our horizontal and vertical speed. Now, of course, our objective here is to reduce both our horizontal and vertical speed to 0 at also altitude 0, otherwise called a landing. But first, our burn will have to consume several more minutes of time. And I do want to show the whole descent burn because it's, you know, fairly harrowing at some points, but I'm going to speed it up by 3 times normal speed. This is not physics warp, this is post-production warp. Here we go. And there are some mountains coming up, which, you know, we are almost crashing into. It's only about a kilometer of separation between us and the surface at some point. Nevertheless, we are proceeding well. It's about 2200 meters per second. It's a low lunar orbit velocity, and we are gradually chipping away at that. We're currently at 1.4 kilometers per second of horizontal speed, and in the delta V readout that's on the center left, you can see we have a good comfortable amount more than our current speed remaining. That means we will be able to stop, and we have some margin for hovering and fine-tuning our landing site. Now, when we were tumbling, oh, look at that mountain. That's going to come frighteningly close. You can see I'm angling up a little bit to try and gain a little bit more vertical separation. But nevertheless, there's yeah, it was just 1,400 meters between us and that mountain, otherwise known as a little more than 1 second of travel. So, yeah, it's fairly harrowing for Catherine, but she's doing good. I was going on about something. Oh yeah, no, I forgot. Anyway, doesn't matter. We're doing our landing burn. The terrain is fairly smooth. That's nice. And I was saying something about having margin to do hovering. I tested when we were tumbling in the beginning. I tested that this engine does throttle back so far so as to reduce the thrust to weight to 1 here near the lunar surface. That means I can effectively fall down whilst keeping the engine on. So apart from fuel considerations, there is no reason for me to turn this engine off, which is good. So the 3 relight limitation should not in fact be a limitation, because as you can see we have over 1100 meters per second remaining, with just about 200 meters per second of speed remaining, which is well, as I said, a handy margin for error. As you recall, the handling of this thing is really sluggish, so I'm going to try and fine-tune our approach really slowly. As you can see, we're only descending by about 5 meters per second at this point, and we're still 600 meters up. So we are definitely going to do a little bit of hovering so I can get the hang of the turning of this thing. I've circled the important readout for your convenience. This is what I'm staring at while performing this spatial maneuvering. Now the goal is to of course get the surface speed down to 0, because we don't want any horizontal speed when landing, because you know that leads to somersaults and rolls and other horrible stuff like that. Unfortunately, I'm at this point staring at the surface speed, which also incorporates the vertical component and not the horizontal speed, which was already zeroed out, but we've now added a couple meters per second again. Fortunately, I do catch on and manage to fix it. We are also ascending now at 2.5 meters per second. Chalk that one up to me learning the controls of this descent module. Of course, it didn't train in any simulators, I just went for it, as a good Kerbal should. And here we go. I get it. I'm throttling down to the lowest this engine will go, and the gravitic pull of the moon is now drawing this descent module in slowly but surely. There is a definite sense of control. This all feels managed, and there's no crazy bouncing, no somersaulting, no hopping. The engine is slowly chugging away. There's still over 700 meters per second of delta V left, only 400 actual meters to go. Yeah, no, they don't have a relation, but what I'm saying through all these numbers is that we've got this. There is a lot of fuel in the tanks. We're not going very fast. The controls are doing exactly what we need them to do. And Catherine is looking forward to a stroll on the lunar surface. And looking ahead, I want you to consider the problem of getting home again. We will have this ascent module with 2087 meters per second of delta V. That is enough to get into orbit of the moon, but not much more. It's certainly not enough to get into a 4,000 by 4,000 kilometer orbit of the moon. That is where our rescue vehicle is. That has sufficient delta V, over 4 kilometers per second in fact, but it only has 3 relights of its engines. How are we going to solve that? In the back of her mind, Catherine is already racking her brain over that problem, and well, it'll be a nice rocketry orbital dynamics puzzle for you guys as well. Put it in the comments to think what you think is the best way to get Catherine home as we slowly descend to the surface. Look at that, how incredibly under control that is. 4 meters per second of vertical velocity, millimeters per second of horizontal velocity, and a very fine-tuned control of that sink rate. Just 2 meters per second now, going to 1.5. I think anything up to like 6 or 7 will be a survivable impact. Still over 600 meters per second of delta V left in the descent stage, and 2 ignitions. Here we are, let's cut the engine, and yeah, everything is stable. Closing the valves, we are on the lunar surface, and Catherine is alive. That's objective 1 achieved. But as I've said, getting back will be a substantial challenge, not so much due to the nature of the moon and physics, but due to oversights of our physics design committee, our rocket design committee, that backed insufficient engine relights on the upper stage of the rocket. That's that's going to be some heads that will roll. But for now, Catherine is doing the science that was prescribed her in her mission book, and with that transmitted back home, it's time to get outside of the lander and, well, go for that famed stroll. So yeah, she's donning her space suit, rather checking it, and moving to the hatch to open it up. Let's see if that will actually work. There we go, clicking the all-important button. There she goes, emerging upside down, releasing her grips on the handholds, actually looking around, no, this still counts as flying, and with some kind of weird somersault, descending to the lunar surface. Very graceful indeed. Here we are, approaching the end of this episode. Next one will tackle the getting home ascension problem. As I said, share in the comments what you think is the best way to go about it, and I'll see you in a couple of days. Thanks for watching. I'm Lorenzo. Goodbye.